I think we are live and welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to see you all. It's been a little bit. I am Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future. It is wonderful to welcome everyone. If you are watching this via our blog and would like to participate, please go to Twitter and use the hashtag Creating the Future. That's the only place we'll be watching is Twitter. We may want to rethink that in the future as we're all rethinking Twitter. But for right now, if you are watching and would like to participate, please tweet to us using the hashtag Creating the Future, and Dimitri will be monitoring that. It is awesome to see you all. Let's take a moment and bring ourselves into the room. If you will say who you are, where you are, and which people, I'll just say it, which people those lands were taken from. If you could just share something that's meaningful in your life right now. So whoever would like to start, just let's dive in, and then I'll just start calling on y'all. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, Mark Hobner. I'm on the lands of the Korkchog and the Shinnecock of Long Island, New York, on the East End. And what else do you want? That was it, right? What's awesome?
Something that's awesome, something that's meaningful in your life.
I'm being Creating the Future questions to about 200 people on Wednesday. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. No, I'm gonna couch it well. I don't think they're gonna see it coming. It's not gonna be something separate. It's gonna be something integrated with the talk. It's to the solid waste managers. There's gonna be 5 supervisors of towns and cities. Yeah, and we're bringing it out. It's circular economy and zero waste and a whole bunch of other things. And what has to be in place for this to work.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Can't wait to hear what happens. You're going to have to report in. Who else? What's going on in your world?
I can go next since I'm also eating lunch and might be on and off camera. It's one of those days where I left with arms full of stuff and none of those things were my lunchbox. So, excuse me. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline DeMarco. I use the pronoun she and her. I am joining you all from the lands of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot people, which is colonially known as Adrian, Michigan today. Something meaningful going on in my life right now is that 2 of our good friends just got engaged. So we're hosting an engagement party for them this weekend. The ask for people is to bring something to share that goes well together. So PB&J, Oreos and milk, some sort of paired item.
Oh, that sounds fun. It sounds like a recipe for a cooking show, for something be leveraged off of that.
Yeah, it's the chopped, here's the random thing in your basket, make dinner with sour gummy worms. Yeah.
I like it. I like it. It's great. How wonderful. Who else? What's going on in your world?
I'll go ahead and go. By the way, Madeline, I would bring dark chocolate and red wine as my pairing. So I'm Justin Pollock. I am on territory of which the Piscataway and Nacotchtank tribes were pushed off of, and which is now the swampland of Washington, D.C. And those of you who know me may notice I'm not wearing glasses because I am trying out the world of contacts. So when I inadvertently go like this to adjust my glasses from years of just habit, give me a little, hopefully I won't do the, trying to pull my glasses off my head that I'm already wearing kind of thing. But so I'm trying a new world. And Dimitri, you may appreciate this. Part of the impetus for this is so that I can actually see my bike computer when I ride my bike and I can actually see what's going on.
Yes, I do appreciate that.
That's wonderful. That's great. How are you liking it so far? How long has it been?
It's been about 3 weeks, although I've been trying different iterations. So I am naturally farsighted, but have old eyes. So I need the progressive. So I'm trying right now. I am actually trying the multifocal to see if
Wow.
they work. So I've been, a couple of days here just to let the eyes adjust and see what works and what doesn't work. And then I have a couple more prescriptions coming my way to try out.
How fun. How fun. And then when you get to our age, you can just have the whole thing done with cataracts. Ah,
Silver lining.
right, exactly. Oh, good, my eyes will work.
I feel compelled to jump in when you mentioned bicycling because that was related to my meaningful awesome. And I identify so much with the issue of trying to see while you're riding on your bike. Anyway, I'm Angie Eikenberry. I'm in Omaha in the traditional treaty lands of the Omaha tribe, as well in Omaha, Nebraska. And my meaningfulness is or awesome is we're just getting ready to sign up for our bicycle ride across Nebraska, which are, we've done it many times over the last few years, but not recently since COVID. So the whole family is signing up to do the week-long bike ride. It's about 450, 500 miles over the state. And so starting to think about getting all our gear together and exactly and the issue of sunglasses and whether I need new ones that have lenses that I can read while I ride has been part of that thinking as well. Good to
Oh,
see
wow.
everyone.
Now, how many days will this take?
It's 7 days. Yeah. So it ranges from like 50 some to 100 miles a day.
Wow.
Usually. And then you're camping. So it's like a whole experience where you really get completely and utterly, tired out, drained out, and you go from town to town with you're just bicycling, eating, and just laying about, basically resting in between. So it's a good vacation for type A type people, I think.
I'd love to join you, Angie. It sounds
Yeah.
wonderful, actually.
You should join us sometimes. First week of June, always.
And definitely first week of June is a good time to get out of here. So
Yeah, and you never know what you get in Western
That's true.
Nebraska. I mean, we've had freezing, below freezing some nights in June. Yeah, so you get everything.
Well, that's a good segue on the eyesight thing for me to follow into. Ron Bulmer from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the lands of the Mi'kmaq peoples, a land called Mi'kma'ki. This is the first year I've ever worn glasses while skiing, actually, because my goggles broke last year. And when I got over the glass goggles, it's been kind of a treat, actually, being able to actually see the fine details when you're skiing. So I'm enjoying that. But my real awesome is my younger daughter, Tessa, has been, because the coach had to take leave for various reasons, she has been coaching the Dalhousie Tigers volleyball team, and they had a very exciting series with the Maritime Finals. They eked it out, and now are heading to nationals. And so it's over in Vancouver. So she's it's been quite an experience for her to be thrown into that head coach role and in such a squeaker, because the conference this year has been very, very tight. So anyway, the stadium was raucous for these 5 really nail biter games, and first time I've ever seen it, because volleyball usually doesn't attract many people, but this was kind of like a hockey game almost, where people were hanging from the rafters and loud. So anyway.
Oh, how exciting is that?
It was very exciting. Yeah.
How fun. Now, are you gonna get to accompany her across the country?
No, I'll be watching online though. I'll see how they do.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. How about you, Jackie? What's going on in your world?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Bradley. I am joining from the lands of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot Nation. And something awesome in my life right now is my partner's sister is actually pregnant with her first child. And so we are getting ready for a baby shower in a couple of weeks. So we are very excited to begin celebrating the new little one who will hopefully join us this summer.
Yay. And you had another awesome one we met last week.
I did. I'm getting married in the fall and we are sending out our invitations. So it's official now.
Yay.
Yay. Babies and weddings. Yay. That's wonderful. Just wonderful. Dimitri, how about you? I will hand over the mic.
Hello, everyone. Dimitri Petropoulos coming to you from the occupied lands of the Tohono O'odham tribe in southern Arizona. I am happy to be here and I love bikes, glasses, volleyball. Sounds wonderful. My awesome is I spent a really cool morning yesterday with my brother, who has a small, pretty old little two-seater airplane, and he wanted to go on a ride and said, you want to come with me? And so he landed at the airport in Tucson, and Hildy dropped me off, and we took off and we went to a little town in New Mexico, airport basically, that has a air museum and all these planes and cool. So we landed and just walked into the museum and looked at all the planes and walked back to his little, it's not a Piper, it's a little like Cessna Cardinal or something, and then took off and came home, and it was just absolutely fun and amazing. And he's such a precise person, and kind of the opposite of me in a lot of ways. That, I mean, he's full of checklists, and getting everything going and whatnot, and maybe bumpy and maybe whatever, but it was just fabulous. So my awesome is spending the day with my brother in the air.
Very, very, very cool. Very cool. And I too am located in Tucson, Arizona, the unceded lands of the Tohono O'odham and the Pascua Yaqui. And what is very, very neat right now is thinking about what those people would have seen 100, 200, 300 years ago, 400, 500 years ago, because this is what we are seeing these days. The poppies are just absolutely gorgeous this year, and we are all just reveling in that. It is an interesting phenomenon. We need to get rains in December in order to have poppies in March. And so we have had actually a rather wet and rather cold winter for the desert here. And a lot of what's happening in California obviously is blowing over here. And the result is we've got poppies, and that's been delightful. The other awesome is I got to spend an hour and a half with Jackie and Madeline last week, plotting and conniving, as an old friend of ours used to say, and trying to figure out different ways to bring creating the future and catalytic thinking into their community more deeply. And I was riding high for 2 days after that. So I appreciate you all. It was pretty cool and groovy. Carl is going to be joining us a little bit late today. I mentioned earlier that I've not heard from Vu or Eli. I know Farah will not be able to join us today. So we will get started. I'll give a little bit of background about where this topic comes from. We had decided earlier this year that in order to mindfully accomplish and reach for what our community has said they want and need, and the benefit that they get from us when it comes to sharing what we've learned about catalytic thinking, we said that we were going to mindfully just sort of slow down, take a deep breath, I would write the book, and which I have been doing, which is moving along. It is a huge task, and I wish I had nothing else to do because it would be very, very fun to just dive in. The other big piece of what I'm working on is the building of, for lack of a better word, a library, documenting all of the experimenting that we've done and sharing that. And that's the most important really things for us to build in a library, is just documenting all of the, I made a list the other day of all of the experimenting that we have done. And since the beginning, not counting the demonstration projects that we've done with others, just what we have done as a group here. It's the stuff that we take for granted as just the way we be, like being open like this and live streaming, and you forget that all of those were experiments. I loved a month or so ago when we were talking about taking some time to just breathe and think. And Jackie, you said, oh, well, that's another experiment. We don't even think about how much we're experimenting. And so the ability to document that and share it broadly is a big part of what I've been thinking about, because that's a big part of what's next. Not doing anything with it right now, but just thinking about it. What that's going to require is funding. We're going to need writers or resourcing in some way, finding writers, sharing that resource with others. And the more I've been thinking about, okay, what exactly am I aiming towards? I keep coming up against our 10-year clock and the uncertainty that I don't know if we're aiming towards being around forever. Taking a deep breath at the 10-year mark, which is December 31, 2026. So it's just about 4 years from now, a little bit less than 4 years from now. Are we talking about just we'll assess and keep going? That would be one approach that I would have to focus on now as I'm thinking about it. It's just the thinking. Or are we actually planning on, by that marker in 2026, having accomplished everything that we thought we might accomplish and sunsetting? And again, I'm not suggesting that this is a decision we have to make and definitely do these things. What I am suggesting is that the work that we do in the interim could be significantly different depending on where we're aiming. Welcome to catalytic thinking. Our thoughts create our actions. And so the question that I think is really important for us to grapple with and think about and come close to is, where are we aiming? Are we aiming at 4 years from now, taking a deep breath, saying, okay, what's the next 10 years look like? Or are we aiming at saying, wow, look at what we have accomplished. We've accomplished everything we set out to, and there's really no reason for us to continue. And so that's sort of the background of what I've been grappling with, and why I asked us all to get together, and why I thought it was an important thing that we include our whole community and live stream this, that this is not, again, the being open experiment. This is not something that especially the degree to which we have engaged our community in this thus far. I think it's really, really important that we talk about this openly. I also think, as y'all might have seen in last week's eJournal, that this is a topic that would probably many, many other organizations would benefit from even just talking about. So as I'm thinking about it, what would be different for a food bank if a food bank said, we've got 10 years versus we're going to be here forever? And I don't know, but it seemed like a discussion that not seemed like, I know this is a discussion that we need to have and that I need some clarity moving forward. Just in terms of where are we aiming? So let's start at the beginning. First of all, let's just take a moment or two. I don't want to go too deep into it because we will be using catalytic thinking, but the first thing in catalytic thinking is to make sure everybody in the room is sort of on the page and how you're feeling about stuff. So let's take just a few moments and just talk about it as a topic. You know, when, you know, not, oh, I wish we would stay open, or, oh, I wish we would close, you know, that kind of, but just, you know, how is this feeling as a topic? What are you noticing about that as a topic?
I'll jump in to say that I think it's definitely a worthwhile thing to discuss. And as you said, many organizations kind of grapple with this, or should maybe grapple with it. I've been doing, you know, some research recently thinking about foundations and whether or not they should be existing in perpetuity, and basically arguing that there's problematic right thing if you have this view of forever kind of, but as well as other issues. But so I think it's really useful to think about that question of what it makes possible to have a sort of deadline or not of.
Yeah, Ron.
I think the thing that comes to mind immediately for me is really exit strategy for a sustainable organization. You know, if seems, you know, you and Dimitri probably are the most heavily invested, and all the rest of the board members from the start till now are probably the next most heavily invested. And I wonder, when you ask that question, I wonder, what's the exit strategy, and are we sustainable, and how can we make that happen? That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah. And those are questions that those are the questions that we're so used to asking in this sector. We're not used to asking, should we sustain? Should we plan on sustaining? Yeah. So thank you for that, Ron, because it really does make it very, very clear. Any other thoughts before we dive in?
So, oh, go ahead,
Just
Dimitri.
thinking, Hildy, about
Sorry.
what you're saying and Ron's comment and Angie's comment. I think about the idea of an experiment. Is it about the experiment, or is it about the laboratory? You know, are we going to, you know, keep the laboratory going to do other experiments or whatever, or is it about the experiment itself? And what happens if you've had a successful, or if you've experimented, successful or not? I mean, that's the definition, you know, who knows, is you report on it. You know, you create a paper, you do whatever, so that others can learn or apply or do, you know, what they need to do. So I'm sort of thinking of it in that context. It's you know, I'm thinking about things like the WPA. There was an issue, there was a problem, this thing was invented, and all of a sudden it did all kinds of amazing stuff. We learned things from that, and then we moved on. So, you know, and sometimes I think I wish we still had the WPA, but regardless, I'm kind of thinking about it like that. So it's less about the laboratory and more about the work that was done in that laboratory.
It's a really interesting analogy. A really, really good analogy.
Well, the other thing that pops up for me too is, and it dovetails a little bit off of what Angie was saying too. You know, there is this rhetoric like that, you know, community benefit and nonprofit organizations are in business to go out of business, which has always struck me as very odd, because we need capacities in our community to thrive, and they need to provide some, you know, so I think about a food bank, and there would have to be a lot to go on for the capacity of people being healthy and having, you know, good, accessible food to be in place, that capacity would go away. So I tend to think about these questions more around the capacity issue than the actual organizational entity issue, which is, what is it that we're trying to, and I think this speaks a little bit, Dimitri, too, to what you were saying, which is what's the capacity that's needed in the community, and what does it take to do that, and what role are we potentially playing in that with regard to a relationship? And so I think there's value in thinking about where those rhetorical comments are coming from. Like to say so it's, it's almost like saying, if our business is to go out of business, it's almost like saying, oh, this is just an episodic problem that we can just get rid of, as opposed to recognizing an ongoing investment. The flip side of that is, with regard to something like creating the future, when you make a declaration of a time frame, that is an experiment. And I think there is an implication in that, a rhetorical implication that after 10 years, we believe we will be at a point where what it is that we are doing is no longer what we are doing. Exactly what that looks like, I don't know, but I think there's something in having made that declaration that to get to that point and just say, oh, well, we need to continue, seems a little hollow. It seems like we missed something along the way that was there. So,
Yeah. Thank you. Very, very, very much so. Very much so. Let's dive in here, because I think the more we talk around the edges, we're going to start getting deep into this stuff. So let's dive in. Starting at the beginning, in asking who would be affected by whichever we aim at, whether we aim at a finite time frame or aim at, we'll pause, take a look around and keep going. We have asked the question, who will be affected in so many different conversations. It was very, very similar to who was going to be affected by our engaging the community and what's next. And what we came to at that point was anybody who's going to benefit in any way by our sharing what we've learned and by catalytic thinking being ubiquitous. And I'm not sure if we need to go into all of the for whom's who would benefit. We've listed it so many times in the past, everything from our current students, our past students, our board members, our staff, our team members, the people whom they touch. I loved, Mark, that you brought Tokwi along to the session last week. The people whose lives we touch, and Jackie and Madeline were certainly talking about how many lives we touch. I know Angie, Justin, we all touch so many lives. I guess the big question for me is what would it make possible for all of those people, both asking both, what would be possible if we aim at sunsetting? If we aim at, what could we accomplish for all of those people? If we aim at sunsetting, what could we accomplish if we aim at taking a deep breath, assessing, and continuing? So let's start with that one. What could be possible for all the people who benefit from creating the future's work? What could be possible if we aim at sort of the assess and continue model?
So the assessing so not sunsetting model. I think that there's potentially, ongoing resources and support that would be available to the folks who use or want to use catalytic thinking.
I think internally we would have time. We'd have time to explore more, time to sort of slow time to continue to experiment and explore.
Thus less pressure to do things by a certain time.
What else? What does it make possible for all those people? So many of whom we heard from when we were doing our engagement last year. If we, what could we accomplish with them, for them?
I think it allows for time for scaling up, if that's in fact part of this resourcing and producing more incomes for a wider range of people, if our assumption is a more just and equitable and kind world.
When you talk about
That's a big statement, right?
Yeah. Talk more about scaling. What would be scaled?
What would be scaled to me is more education for this type of work to be reproduced in more types of communities and just more communities. So more reach, I guess, more resources, more education, more reach. And that doesn't preclude, of course, assessments along the way, just like the 10-year one, I assume, is a big assessment time. Well, you'd probably want to be assessing as you go anyway. So,
yeah.
I think there's also capacity for people to get involved in the work and find that community. There could be people in 10 years that are in high school now, that haven't been exposed to this, that can grow into the work.
Yep. And a new generation. Good to see you, Carl. Glad you're here. Anything else that it makes possible for all of the people who benefit? If we aim at taking a deep breath at the end of 26 and continuing, anything else that is made possible?
So I think continuing off of some of what Madeline, you had put forward, I actually sort of think of the subset of potentially the people who aren't aware yet, but there is still that sort of central hub point that, independent of where the capacity is coming by having the entity exist, there is sort of the, a accessible singular point of contact. And singular is not the right word, but there is sort of a hub that people can find more easily.
Yeah, it's sometimes more attractive to get involved in the work when it feels current, like it feels alive in that moment, like it feels like it's happening right then and there. And then the work can also speak to more of the specific context of whatever is happening at that time. I mean, obviously the questions are timeless, that sort of thing, but the specific context.
Yep. Well, I know that other things will come up. Let's sort of flip to the other side. What does it make possible for all of those individuals if we aim at mission accomplished by the end of 26?
First thing that it's sort of the flip side, but so I think the notion of sort of the greater independence, the people feeling a stronger sense of ownership around how the ideas are being proliferated and their contribution to it and how they are engaged with it. I think you know, the analogy I'm thinking of. So right now I have this on my hand. I think about the fact that like sometimes we need a brace, but then there is a point at which, all doctors will say the goal is to no longer have that thing. The goal is for your body, your mind, your practice to just be embodied with it, and for you to not feel dependent or reliant or beholden to sort of this, other entity. So, by not being there, you sort of just remove that, and it does, whether for good or whether coercively or as a healthy nudge, you are demanding that people be a little bit more independent and ownership and collective in making whatever it is possible.
Yep. I see Mark has posted removing the pressure from succession planning and handoff. I love taking the training wheels off. What else does it make possible if we aim at, and Carl, just to bring you up to speed a little bit, in addition to the stuff that we had shared in the written stuff, what we're talking about is not making a decision. We will definitely sunset, we will definitely keep going, but that our actions between now and then could be significantly different depending on where we're aiming. And it's really, where are we aiming? Not we have to do it, but your actions are different depending on where you're aiming. We asked, initially we started with if we just aim at assessing and continuing at the end of 26, what does that make possible for the folks who benefit? And now we're really thinking about, what does it make possible if we aim at sunsetting? If we aim at saying, what could we accomplish if we have a deadline? Let's put it that way. One of the things that occurs to me with that word deadline, Dimitri and I have been working on redoing a class a recorded class that we last recorded in 2017. We suddenly looked up and realized that 2017 was 6 years ago. I don't understand how that happened, but 2017 was 6 years ago. Several of you were in the webinar that we did last week with Pano, or 2 weeks ago, with Pano on catalytic thinking. There's going to be a series of them every 4 weeks. And having that deadline, knowing that on March 28th, we are doing a webinar on collective enoughness. Let's look at all the pieces and going, oh, this really needs to be redone. It put our feet to the fire. It said, you have to accomplish this by this time. There's something powerful in, you have to accomplish this by this time. It also made us really creative in terms of what do we have to build on. And so those two things are popping for me, given that we're, I turned to Dimitri before we started the meeting and said, okay, by the end of today, I want to be ready to do an e-journal tomorrow. That deadline thing is powerful. Yeah, let me.
I know that there are folks here who have been part of the journey for the whole time, and there's new folks here. I wanted to just touch upon the having the deadline, but in the context of the shot clock that was sort of the instigator for this, or at least that was a metaphor for this a long time ago. And just briefly, prior in basketball, prior to a shot clock, that one of the teams would hold on to the ball and just keep holding on to it. They would never shoot. So no, the other team couldn't get it. So if they were ahead by 2 points, they just kept going. It was the most boring game in the world, but it was also a continuation. The game just kept going and going and going. So the metaphor for an organization that just keeps going, going, going. With the advent of the shot clock, they had to shoot after 2 minutes, so the time frame. And so because of that, it changed the nature of the way they played the game. And because of that, you ended up with these amazing players with amazing skills because they had to do it in that time frame. So it completely changed the way they worked and the way they played the game once they instigated the shot clock. So that was sort of, if you go back and look at the the post in the article that goes back to that, just talking about it, just wanted to bring that thought present. That's one of the benefits of that is that it changes the nature of the way you play. And Hildy, that sort of, addresses what you just mentioned in terms of, we're going to get this done by 5 o'clock tomorrow or today or whenever. You work differently than, yeah, we got this that's due and we're going to get it done and, it's going to happen. The other comment I wanted to make is on, I'm sort of torn. I think it was Madeline or Jackie I think it was Madeline who was talking about new people coming in and energy and whatever. So in one sense, you want there to be some kind of beacon that they can, look to or go to. On the other hand, you want them to feel empowered to create new beacons, to create whatever. And if there's only one out there, well, I'm competing with it or, whatever. And it almost makes me think in some ways of a conference or a summit or something like that occasionally brings everybody together to re-energize, to recharge without an obligation that you are always there. You are always doing this. So kind of a combination of thoughts there.
Yeah, what pops to mind when you said that, Dimitri, and it riffs off of what Justin said before, and then Justin, you go, is the number of people who ask us because we are seen as the place, the number of people who ask us, is it okay to share this? When that's what we want. But by having that perception of somebody owns it rather than everybody owns it, it just struck me is how many people have asked us since the beginning, even before it was Creating the Future, when we were just teaching this to our friends. Is it okay to share it? And the difficulty we've had in expressing to people, we want you to share it. Justin, go ahead.
So this is sort of looping back my thing about, when people say, our business is to go out of business, because what I was going to say was, you can only say that if you are really willing to look at what it takes to accomplish the outcomes you're trying to accomplish. So when you externalize everything from the organization to say, we will be gone when the capacity is met, one way or the other. And I mean, it would be, if I actually heard, if I saw in practice the kind of thinking that in an organization when they say, our goal is to go out of business, I don't actually see them looking at structural change. I don't actually look at them figuring out what does it really take to do X. So I think for us, that's the real power of this, which is it forces us to stop thinking about what we do or what we could do or what we might, and goes back to sort of, Ron, what you were talking about with continuity. And it forces us to actually say, what would it take for people to be able to X in general? And is that existing? And where? And what is it that's required to continue to support that? That's there. But I think that's the big psychological advantage you get by having we will cease, is it forces us to say, well, if we will cease, then we need to make sure that there's a mechanism for supporting the capacity that we think is necessary out there. And it does, I think, to some of what Dimitri was saying, it forces you to rethink, it's not about what we do or what we did or what we could do or what we want to do. It's about really understanding the landscape, really understanding how those affected can get what they need to be able to do what we think is something people should be able to do in their humanity.
Yeah.
And it gives another example, like us sunsetting is also an experiment and a tool for other people to
Mhm.
learn and see examples of how to end the work, because a lot of this model is about planning and how you start a project and everything that goes into doing it. We rarely talk about how to end things, and especially in a way that doesn't feel like failure. Like that's what I'm having to navigate during this conversation, is all the time we talk about ending like we failed and that was because something went wrong and there was no longer resources.
Yeah.
But having that model out there in a planned, intentional way is really valuable.
It's there's a piece of it in yeah, we failed, but there's also a piece in having the deadline be something arbitrary. Well, we said we were going to be gone by the end of 26 and we're gone, rather than what Justin's talking about, which is our mission, which is ensuring that the capacity, you know, we talk about ubiquitous all the time, ensuring that that capacity exists outside of just us, which is very different than an arbitrary, well, we said 2026, that's it, bye guys. Yeah. I'm also from, you know, we've talked ad nauseum anymore, AA comes up in these conversations. And which is the opposite of having a central hub. Which is there's, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous in pretty much every community, every place, every church, every workplace, every major workplace probably in the world. The information is available online. You can get a copy of the big book. And again, I'm not endorsing AA's philosophies or their methodologies, just as a model of something that has proliferated in society. You know, they prove that it's possible without the need. And again, it comes to that creativity. And I love the way that you framed it, Justin, in terms of aiming at sunsetting requires, if you're going to be us, if you're going to live with your values and not just say we're shutting down, aiming at accomplishing the mission by X date, or ensuring that the mechanisms are in place for supporting that capacity. I love the way you phrased that, Justin. Is very, very different than just arbitrarily saying, "Oh, yep, that's it. Bye, kids." What else does it make possible if we aim at saying mission accomplished? There's something there, both Justin and what you were talking about, and Madeline and what you were talking about, in defining what done means. What does, you know, we could say we're done if we've documented everything we learned and it's online and now you can get it by, or we can define done as you said, Justin, making sure that there's mechanisms in place for supporting the capacity within communities and individuals. So I think that there's not that we have to define done right now, but that aiming at, quote, mission accomplished, aiming at sunsetting makes us define done, makes us define what would good look like, forces that question. Yeah, Madeline, what is enough? And how many organizations keep going because they keep going? I mean, you know, the classic example is March of Dimes. March of Dimes, you know, those who have studied this, I see Angie, you're nodding. Those who have studied this, March of Dimes existed to get rid of polio. And then polio was gone. Oh, well, we have an organization. Let's provide stuff. Yeah. Yeah, Ron.
I think too, what I've noticed over the years is a certain number of people, probably a majority in some ways, lurk more than become actively involved in things. And I think sunsetting creates a dilemma for people, because with the organization stopping, I think it forces them to ask themselves, am I still really interested enough in this to actually activate myself in the effort, whatever that is, as opposed to lurking. And how am I going to do that? And you won't know until you stop to see who those people are.
And that could just be a condition for success. So that it sounds like what needs to be in place is mechanisms for, again, that term, the mechanisms for that capacity, it's sort of what would need to be in place if we determined we were going to sunset is the exact capacities that you're talking about, Ron. Absolutely.
Mm.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, because as I'm looking at the list of what we listed on the assess and continue list of what that would make possible, ongoing resources and support, slow time to experiment and explore with less pressure. It allows time for scaling, expanding the network, more education, more reach, the capacity for people to get involved. There's a place for people to find info. What's occurring to me as I'm looking at all of that is none of that is precluded by our aiming at sunsetting. That those become conditions, just like Ron, what you were talking about, those become conditions for what would need to be in place. There would need to be in place mechanisms for expanding the network. There would need to be in place the capacity for new people to get involved. There would need to be in place central place where people could find information. I mean, it's occurring to me as I'm looking at this, that those are also conditions of what would need to be in place if we were to aim at saying mission accomplished. You know, I mean, some of what we've talked about, going back to the AA model, is, and we talked about this a lot internally, when we've all just been sort of getting together to talk operationally. We've talked about, in the AA model, sharing the capacity that exists in community already. So just like we're doing a partnership right now with Pano on these webinars, the next step on those webinars is to reach out to more people. Reach out to, you know, where we're experimenting and setting things up. We have partnered with Pano for 10 years now. And so it was a very, very comfortable place to say, we want to start doing this. Will you be our first? Can we do this together? But the next thing I'm thinking about is the ability to go to 5 or 6 different organizations all together, and we all collaboratively do one webinar and everybody chips in. And there's, I think that again, that way of thinking about, if we didn't own it, if the mandate was to share it, what could that look like in a way that by the end of 26, which is almost 4 years, it's not tomorrow, in a way that gives us the encouragement and the mandate to share it. You know, that for example, it's not just finding writers to document what we've learned in our experiments. And it's not just sharing it through our channels, but sharing it ubiquitously, mainstream media, making sure that it's out there for people to actually say, oh, there's a different way to do this, which we might not be so inclined to do. We might think, oh, that would be cool, but we don't have time right now. We're going to focus on just our people. And I mean, it's just, there's something expansive about it. I don't know. I'm babbling a little bit.
Well, to Justin's point in the chat too, I mean, it sort of gives you permission to let go a little, right? And it creates space for other people to come in and do things together. And I was thinking in relation to the foundations example I gave before, I'm not sure how much of this is that applicable, but there's, you know, arguments around ending perpetuity have to do with organizations or foundations in particular, or other organizations that are holding assets to spread them out more quickly, right? And disperse them more quickly, but also let the sort of current generation figure out, how things should be done and what, and not have this sort of dead hand of the, donor deciding, right, what should be happening in the future. And then there's some arguments, around like greater risk taking might happen. I mean, I think that that's not so applicable. We kind of do that already. So those are some other kind of reasons, I guess, to think about some kind of deadline, if you will.
Yeah.
I always think about metaphors, and I'm thinking about a ecosystem where a particular set of trees or plants never die. They never put their energy back into the soil. They never create an environment for new plants to evolve or new creatures to evolve. They just statically continue forever. And I'm sort of thinking of that analogy in terms of organizations. I went back and I was looking at the original 2016 article on why a 10-year mission, which talks about the shot clock and talks about whatever. And it's, the doing versus getting it done. And, we could be, doing forever, or we get it done. And, we're defining here what get it done means. And that's great. But it's really, I'll put it in the chat box because it's easy to find. But there's a lot of good stuff in that, like 5 or 6, 7 paragraphs that are there. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Doing versus getting it done. One of the things I've been doing a lot of writing about this, the article that I did for Nonprofit Quarterly last year really focused on this. The model of how community benefit organizations of all kinds, social enterprises included, government programs, is all rooted in business. It is a business model. We're all corporations for the most part. We're all corporations. We're all set up, and we've got a little subsection under the IRS code, but we're treated like businesses. And the goal of a business is to just keep going. Pepsi is not thinking about sunsetting, and it is such a self-defeating model for accomplishing social change. That's been my argument for, you all know that I did what I was affectionately calling the Sisyphus project of, we're all just pushing the rock up the hill. And that article really talks a lot about, and we've talked so much also about being more movement-like versus organization-like. Movements don't exist to continue to exist. And we build nonprofit organizations we even have entire industries have arisen around, quote, organizational sustainability, the importance of organizational sustainability. And Justin, you talk so much about, are we talking about organizational capacity or are we talking about community capacity? We don't talk about community capacity. We talk about organizational capacity. Capacity building initiatives are not about community, they're about organizations. And I think that is immensely self-defeating. In terms of just what my focus has been system-wide for the past several years. I think one of the things, and talking about permission to let go and to share and et cetera, I think what aiming at sunsetting makes possible is beyond permission, is a mandate to share, is a mandate to be more creative about sharing. And it's not sharing the concepts, it's sharing the work. It's okay, if we're no longer here, who's going to teach? If we're no longer here, who's going to convene? If we're no longer here, who's going to, spread the gospel? I think there's the mandate to figure that out. And which is again, using the food bank analogy, if the importance is that at the -1 end, nobody goes hungry, and at the +1 end, everyone has everything they need, what does it take for that not to be dependent on an organization? What does it take for that capacity to exist in community?
There's something, and this might relate back to what you were saying somehow, Hildy, but I don't know if it directly answers your question, that feels very like scarcity driven about this idea of going on forever, of we need to have all the resources so we can exist tomorrow, and I need to keep all the knowledge so that I have a job instead of sharing it along. And we're so focused on having all the things so we can exist tomorrow that we're not focused on using what we have today.
Whoa. It's the hoarding thing. Oh, wow.
That definitely seems to be what we see happening right in the foundation world, but perpetuity just leads to like, we have to protect our principle. Over and over, you see that.
Yeah. Wow. The immediately image I got, Madeline, was the squirrel and nuts. Yeah. Yeah, we got to keep it all in our cheeks. Whoa. Well, and let me flip this. Some of you have heard have heard this, and for those who have not, I will just do like a second of teaching here. Y'all have seen our stuff about decision making using a matrix is weighed against objective criteria and blah 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 blah. What we have found though is when we have a binary decision, should we this or should we that, we have a tendency to do pros and cons. And pros and cons is asking, well, okay. When we do pros and cons, the list of pros could be 400 miles long, and the cons could have 2 things on it. But because the cons are all about the things that scare us, we say, yeah, we're not going to do it. So even though we have a list of 900 things of why we should do it, the 2 things that are on the cons list are scary, so we don't do it. Or we really have to grapple in order to get past that. What we found with the brain science that we have looked at with that is we're basically asking 2 different parts of our brains to talk to each other, and they don't talk to each other. And the fear part of our brain will win. So what we're asking is pros is frontal lobe, cons is the scary part, and the scary part wins. And so what we have found as a practice is we have to compare apples to apples and frontal lobe to frontal lobe. What does it make possible if we do this? What does it make possible if we do that, which we just did? The other side of that is the cons side. What's the worst that could happen if we continue? If we aim at continuing, what's the worst that could happen if we aim at sunsetting? And again, that's the fear part talking to the fear part rather than the fear part trying to talk to the frontal part. So let's look at let's do the worst. what is the worst that could happen if we decide that we're going to aim at assessing at the end of 26 and continue? What's the worst that could happen?
Nobody cares.
Tell me more.
It would be devastating if we carried on. And it's the same actually if we closed down, but it would be devastating if we carried on and like it didn't matter to anyone. Because we were not seen as relevant to the world around them and how they do social change.
Yeah.
Which also, you mean, at the risk of sort of sideboarding and derailing your question, Hildy, I mean, I think as part of, I mean, our calculations about, you know, I mean, how we think about things, it is also worth asking ourselves, like, do things change? You know, are things over time? You see what I mean? Are we over time? I'm not saying we are, but I think we should at least ask ourselves that. But yeah, my worst fear about all our work, whether it's my work personally or what I do with you guys, it's fear of just like not being relevant anymore.
Yeah. Wow. It's the March of Dimes thing. We're not relevant, but we can be.
Well, I think also the, and this is part of the transition of leadership. Nobody wants to take on the burden of an organization and whole entity. That there's no one who's willing to step in and carry that weight.
Mm-hmm.
If I could have a second bite of the cherry, and I don't know if this is sort of almost the opposite of what Justin is just saying, the other worst thing that could happen is that we would be sucking resources out of a system that might be better employed somewhere else.
Ooh.
You come across that expression of zombie charities, the idea that they just carry on, they don't have an impact, and they are using precious resources. So this is why, I mean, I know this group of people know this, but it's why it's so important, you know, when using your March of Dimes things, where we've got to make sure all the time that we're relevant and that we're not taking up precious resources.
Yeah. Huge.
Good comment.
Third bite of the
I'm
cherry.
thinking about years ago, there was an individual that we worked with who wanted to do a conference. And we sat down and matrixed the whole conference, and the conference was the worst possible thing they could do. And what in essence happened is the person rationalized that the conference was going to happen and went ahead and did it and lost their shirt. You can rationalize anything. So, you know, even if you have objective criteria, or as objective as we could be, if you really want to do or not do something, you'll come up with reasons why it makes sense to you, and you will move forward in that direction. And I think about March of Dimes in that sense. Well, we have this great money receiving donation system that is already in place. Let's just continue and use the money someplace else.
Yeah, Ron.
I hate to bring this up, but if something tragic were to happen to you, Hildy and Dimitri, what would happen to Creating the Future?
Ask Angie and Carl and and Madeline and Mark and Justin and Jackie.
Yeah,
You're
we
muted.
call Ellis. We call the
Call the lawyer.
first we would heavily mourn, and then call Ellis.
I hope so, for at least a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, you have nevertheless hit you have touched a hot button, or whatever the expression is there, and it's one of the reasons why this has been such a difficult conversation. It seems is that it's so intertwined with Dimitri and Hildy that it's difficult to talk about it without fearing that we are making a commentary upon them. and their fantastic contribution. Yeah, and it's difficult for sort of, I think it's difficult for us as well, in the sense that we just don't have the knowledge and skills and expertise that Hildy and Dimitri have amassed over such a long period, and it feels incredibly daunting.
Yeah. Well, and it gets to, I think it might have been Justin who asked, one of the worst that could happen if we assess and continue is no one wants to take over the burden of leadership, or is capable, or feels capable, or we're not ready, or et cetera. Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons, I don't really like bringing this up, but even I know my own, if I think of that happening, I don't really think I have the capacity to properly introduce this to someone. We all have, probably an angle that's worthy and correct, but or would stand up to the test of questioning. But I kind of wonder, and this might be not related to this conversation at all, but I always think of, when you're an organization, what's the practice of personal responsibility to the organization? And to me, that's one of the things that, say for, a board member, what is the what is the benchmark of adequacy for that to happen? And it goes again, you might think, well, that kind of goes against participation, broad participation, but also there seems to be a bit of a sort of a spectrum of almost organizational ability. So I'm just throwing it out there because it just strikes me, if we're talking about bringing people in and then doing the work in the community, what does that look like?
And again, I think that is a perfect conditions question for if we were to say we're going to spread this more and be more ubiquitous. What does that look like? What does that take? What needs to be in place? Yeah, I think you're hitting it right on, Ron. And anything else that is the worst that could happen if we aim to assess at the end of 26 and keep going. There's a piece for me, and I don't have an exact word. So years ago, we were trying to make a decision about something, and we were doing this. What's the worst that could happen if we do? What's the worst that could happen if we don't? And a guy that was working in our office, Nick, brilliant guy. We were sitting down together and we were all going through, okay, what's the worst that could happen if we take this direction? And we sort of thought it through and said, well, there's actually nothing really bad that could happen if we take this direction. We said, and what would be bad what would the worst thing happen if we take this direction? And Nick looked up quietly and he said, we go against everything we believe in. And that was the end of the discussion. Because if the worst that could happen here is we go against everything that's in our values, then maybe we need to be looking at the other option. And that I keep hearing Nick's words in my head. There's so much we have talked about in terms of the value of sharing, the value of not owning, the value of having other people. The AA model wouldn't keep coming up if we weren't thinking about what does it take to be more distributed. In the early days when we first were teaching immersion, one of the required texts was an old book called The Starfish and the Spider. And it was about the power of distributed networks. The analogy being that if you cut off the arm of a starfish, the starfish will grow another arm and the arm could grow another starfish. If you start chopping up at a spider, the spider dies. So the difference between a hierarchical organization and a distributed organization. And, you know, the book is 10, 15 years old. So it's talking about things like file sharing and Napster. Remember Napster? The Supreme Court rules that file sharing is illegal, and the recording industry sighs a sigh of relief and says, oh, good, file sharing is dead. File sharing is not dead 15, 20 years later, and has this wonderful, wonderful story about the inability of certain leaders to comprehend that the internet wasn't owned by anybody. And he tells this delightful anecdote about going to talk to a group of CEOs and talking about that, and they just kept wanting to know who is the president of the internet. And finally, the guy just couldn't deal with it anymore. He said, fine, I am. It's me. And so that text was in our the stuff that people read before they came to immersion. And so being distributive, we've talked so much when we were talking about what form should this organization take, which we spent several years talking about. All of that was about distributed. It was about distributed decision-making. It was about, as much as we can, what does it take to share? And there's something organization-centric to me as we're talking about this, that just feels wrong. It feels like it goes against what we believe in. I know I've been babbling here, but there's just something I don't have any specifics. It feels like it would go against everything we've been talking about for the past 10 years. What's the worst that could happen if we aim at sunsetting? If we aim at accomplishing everything that we can accomplish by the end of 26?
I think there's a possibility that people might think, even though you've explained why this was a success in so many ways for 10 years, if you sunset, it might be interpreted as a lack of commitment to the process or a failure in some people's eyes. And obviously, like Carl said, there's no further outcome in catalytic thinking, potentially, if no one carries it on.
Yep. What else? The worst that could happen if we aim at sunsetting.
And most of the things that pop into my mind either tied to, I mean, some of what Ron is saying and Carl have been saying, but if the capacity isn't there to continue the outcomes, then it collapses, becomes just, you know, something that passes along. There isn't the ability of things to grow, to expand, of new people to be able to. So you basically, you know, end up with the graying out of catalytic thinking as those who practice it slowly hit their shelf life.
Gray out. I will never gray out. Only my hairdresser knows for sure.
I feel like FOMO is what comes. It's like there's just this fear of like missing out. I'm not sure what it is that we'd be missing out on. You can never know. But I feel like that's what I feel a lot of, whether it's, oh, this came up, we should have addressed this, or I lost this community, or I don't know. That's what comes to mind for me.
I got a basic one. It's who am I going to call? Who am I going to email? I have a question about this.
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
Who am I going to call?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Madeline, I think, one of the things that drives me is that I feel we need to leave the world a little bit better place for our kids, and their kids. And I think they will be missing out. I truly believe this is something special, whether it is or it isn't, but that's my belief. And I think, you feel compelled to try to make a difference before you die, at this stage of the game, anyway, for me. And maybe you do all along in life, probably do.
I hate to use this because it's such a direct word choice, but making a difference before we die is like the definition of a deadline, a deadline. But I mean, it's just, but it is. It's, what I'm sort of smiling at, and I know I've mentioned several times today, that would be a condition for success. That would be a condition for success. If we were to aim at sunsetting, what we would really be aiming at would be ensuring, I'm going to keep using your words, Justin, I love them, ensuring that the mechanisms are in place for supporting the capacity for catalytic thinking in communities outside of needing to come to creating the future. That, like, I'll keep coming back to AA, like AA, there'd be stuff on a website. You can get the AA big book on it, go to, I think it's aa.org, I don't know. But you can get how to form a group. You can get all of the stuff. So there is a central repository, but that's it. And but everything that we're talking about is a condition for success if we are to ensure that by the end of 26, there are mechanisms for supporting that capacity. Nobody caring, it not being relevant. Flipping that, a condition for success would be that we would need to have things in place so that this continued to be relevant. No one wanting to take on the burden of leadership. Leadership would be happening in communities and et cetera. What would it take for there to be leadership to make catalytic thinking ubiquitous? Our sunsetting could be interpreted as a failure. What would it take to a condition for success would be celebrating that this was a 10-year experiment and what happened at the end of that 10-year experiment. Very much, Dimitri, I loved your analogy of is it an experiment, is it a laboratory? There's nobody to carry it on. Okay, well, a condition for success would be that there be someone to carry it on and that there be mechanisms in place. But everything that we're listing and those of you who I know, Mark, you were in the session last week. I don't know if anybody else was in the webinar, but one of the things that we talk about is that through the lens of catalytic thinking, you start seeing problems not as challenges and obstacles and problems, but as unmet conditions for success. And everything that we've listed here, the capacity isn't there to continue the outcomes. That would be a challenge. That would be a problem. The opposite way of framing it is what needs to be in place. There would need to be the capacity to continue the outcomes. So it looks to me that everything that we're aiming at, all of the things that we're saying are worst are things that would be folded into if we were to aim at sunsetting. And I need to stop saying sunsetting. Yeah. If we were to aim at accomplishing the sharing of our resources and making catalytic thinking ubiquitous, that's what we're talking about. If we were to, so resources are shared, mission is accomplished, done is defined by 2026. What we're basically saying is those are all the conditions for success that would need to be in place.
I might add one just sort of clarification, which I think is just whatever those things are, they don't include a centralized entity. Like I don't, like we want to have that as the target, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
for us to, basically the mission is, or mission accomplished is there's no longer a need for a centralized entity to move this movement forward. So I just think that we don't want to forget that like that's in order for the tenure to be true. I mean, that's in essence what we're saying is the entity doesn't need to exist as it is anymore.
Yep, I love that.
One of the things that this makes me think about is information and ideas versus physical things. So catalytic thinking is a series of ideas, and it is information that it can be spread to anyone, anywhere. Physical things are an organization, a 501c3, a fundraising machine, all of those things. So it is, I'm just sort of, I'm not really clear on it, but I'm just sort of thinking about, all right, what are we really talking about here? Hildy, when you talk about AA, it is really a set of ideas, and those ideas manifest in meetings and coffee and practices, but it's still a set of ideas. And what catalytic thinking is a set of ideas that we aren't tied to the specific methodology of transmitting those ideas or people using those ideas. They will transcend that. So that's, I know there's more to that, and I'm not really getting my fingers on it, but that's, what I'm thinking about here.
It brings me back to when we first started talking about this. There was something in my brain that said a deadline makes us more creative. That not being tied to a specific methodology of it's the how. It's the how, not being tied to a specific this is how. And the default in this sector that this is how you do it. It forces us to share. And again, when we talked earlier about people feeling ownership of the ideas and proliferation, it is not about permission to share. It forces us to share. Yeah, Mark.
We're struggling with the idea of deadline. Let me, I had a deadline at 1 o'clock before I got to this meeting, and it was based on a verbal commitment that I made to two people that I would get something done by 1 o'clock. That was my commitment. That was my word. So rather than call it maybe a deadline, I don't know, a fulfillment of a commitment, a time commitment, maybe take the edge off it. Because what that does is, let me just blurt out some more here. What that does is it contributes to somebody else's success. Because I know people were waiting for this because they needed to do something else for other people. So they've got a commitment that goes downline till 8:30 Wednesday morning. So my commitment to that was to take the pressure off of them, to make sure that they were fulfilling their commitments and their obligations in turn.
Yeah. Huge. That framing is gorgeous. Fulfilling a commitment. So given the question that we began with, in terms of aiming our work for the next 4 years, it feels like we're aiming at defining what done would look like and accomplishing our mission, accomplishing done by the end of 2026. Am I right? Am I wrong in that? Is there, if we're looking at a direction of where the work is aiming? Yeah, Carl.
I think in response to your question, I come back to this, to the point that Dimitri was sort of making earlier about experiment and the nature of an experiment. So done is doing an experiment. Done is not necessarily implementing or having some perfect answer from that experiment, if you see what I mean. I mean, we could probably all get a bit meta now and sort of go on about the nature of sort of like how you advance knowledge and what experiments do, and so on. But we're just, yeah, I think by done, we set ourselves a goal of advancing knowledge. And I think we can say that we have done that and we have learned some things. But the nature of any experiment like this is that you're never finished. We are, certainly in the social sector, we are in this state of perpetual beta. And so some of this, and maybe this is the psychological sort of aspect of what we've been talking about today, some of this is about saying, and we hand on the baton at that point. So, because I think just as I'm talking, where I'm thinking, Hildy, is that I don't like this idea that we're done, because this thing that we're part of, it's never done. But our role in it might, we have to. I think what you were saying earlier. Sorry, sorry if I'm rambling, everybody. What I think you were saying earlier, and for me, what's so potentially valuable about this process is that 99.9% of people who work in this sector or who run social sector organizations, things end badly. That they end in an unplanned way. They don't end as you intend to. People walk around. You must all have come across these people, especially like trustees in the sector, who walk around who say, "Bloody hell, I'm sick of being part of this, and I'm going to resign when we're done. I'm going to resign when we've sorted stuff out." But nothing is ever sorted out. So we've got to find a better way of saying, of making people comfortable with this idea that it's never sorted. The experiment is never finished. But we are going to find a way of saying our role in the experiment might be finished, and we are going to carefully plan for a handover, if a handover is possible, again going on all the conversations we've had, but also giving you a forewarning that we can't go on forever, because nobody can. Sorry, it's a long rant.
Really good. Yeah, really. I love the image of handing off the baton, because that's so much of what we're talking about. I mean, our mission, it has been to experiment with applying catalytic thinking in a whole variety of settings, which we have done, and to share what we've learned. That is very, very precise, and that work can be done. That specific piece of the work can be done. The impact is what needs to be handed off. Okay, now take this and do something with it. I love the handing off the baton image. I'm really liking the word images we're coming up with, because I have not come up with good ones. So thank you. Mark.
All right, art and music, here we go. One of the somebody I'm involved with said, you have to decide when the song is done, when the painting is done, right? But it's never really done, because it's going to sit there until one more note goes in and one more brushstroke goes on. at some point, you got to take the sheet off and show the crowd. But after that was not so much with art, but with music, the audience changes. So you may change the performance. You may add a little here and a little there, and you may add a whole section to the thing and find that it was really great. I think this is what happens when we share our, I don't want to say our experience, because I don't think any of us can ever take all of our experience and really share it with anybody. I mean, give it away. You can't give the whole thing away. It doesn't happen. But you give the tools away. And what we're finding now is that when we give these tools to other people, they take on a different life. They emerge, they become creative themselves, and they become applicable to their time and their experience. And we're not going to control that. I can give you a whole set of tools on how to develop a social program. And maybe you use them as they are, those tools. But you're going to find that this audience is different, or that this application is different, or that these people aren't listening. I've got to shuffle. I've got to grab another tool out of the box. But go back to either the piece of art. It's done when you're done.
Yeah, Ron.
Just when Justin was speaking about centralization versus decentralization, and Carl was talking, I was kind of thinking, I looked back at our basic homepage and what the experiment is, what our mission is, and I'm really wondering, what is it we're talking about today? Are we talking about further clarifying what our expectations are in 2026? Or, and what was your objective, Hildy? What made this come to light so clearly for you that you needed to explore this before this meeting? I'm interested in both of those.
Really not knowing where to aim. Where to aim my work over the next year, over the next, okay, I write the book. We definitely need to, so I can give you something very, very concrete. If we are going to, I write the book, I find writers, and we document what we have learned. Those writers do the documenting. It's again a part of shifting and changing how we're doing things. Are we creating a system for sharing that information, or are we sharing it? Very, very different. If we're creating a system that the information is constantly shared, then what we do in the next couple of years is one thing. If we are creating a ongoing, our job for the next 20, 30 years is going to be to share this, then we create a completely different system. One requires deep engagement with others who can share this and make it ubiquitous, and one requires that we build an edifice. And so my impetus was entirely, right now, my day-to-day is focused on writing the book and creating some classes that needed to be created over the past couple of years, and I just haven't had time, and this has given me time. So thank you all for that nice slow time. Once the classes are all completed, once the book is done, my work is going to be to raise money. It's not a lot of money, but raise money to hire writers to document all the experiments that we have done so that we can share this. And once I started to think about raising money, I started to ask the big questions. What am I raising money for? And I had no answer. So the question of what are we raising money for? What are we finding the resources for changes significantly if we're looking at building an entire system that okay, well, sharing this is going to be our work over the next 10 years. over the next 15 years. Very, very different than this is a short-term project at the end of which we are aiming at the following outcomes. And that's the best I can do. I felt like I didn't know where I was aiming. And if I don't, I am the kind of person that really needs context. I can't move forward if I don't have context. I know that there are people who operate very, very at their best when they've got very small, give me the task and that's it. I don't need to know the big picture. I am stopped if I can't see the big picture. And I couldn't see the big picture. I couldn't see the context. So thank you for asking, Ron.
Yeah, that's helpful. I'm curious, just as a follow-up, are we needing to refine our mission and experiment? Because what we're talking about today is, you know, it's a little bit different than what I read as our mission and experiment right now.
I don't know. What does it say?
Well, you know, to
Changes
determine the experiment is to determine how much more humane the world would be if the questions embedded in all systems everywhere were bringing out the best in each other. Well, that's a little different than organizational stuff, like whether we're centralized or decentralized, or if we're continuing or not. And our mission is to teach people how to change the systems they find themselves in, to aim those systems at bringing out the best in people, all by changing the questions they ask. We do this by applying catalytic thinking framework in a variety of settings and then sharing what we learn from those experiments.
So the mission has not changed. The mission is the same. And the question about whether we are decentralized or not is a how question. It's not an ultimate question. The vision of a more humane world, I think, I hope that's at the core of what we're doing. I hope that's our context. So at least for today, I don't think we need to rewrite it, but I don't know.
Well, actually, if you want to be decentralized versus centralized, I think that's a pretty, yeah, you're right. It's a how, but it changes how you think about everything going forward, I think. At least it does to me.
It definitely does, and we have been aiming at being decentralized since we started our conversations easily 5 years ago about what the organization would look like.
Starfish in the spider.
The starfish and yeah.
So it's an internal thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really it's like I said, I think it's a how. It's not a why, it's a how. Mark?
I've been thinking about something Justin said 2 years ago, and it's finally making sense. The emergence, it's actually convergence, and I think we've got three things here. And what I'm hearing today is that we've got a set of tools, right? Those are the how things, right? And you could give those to anybody. You could let somebody read a book, or go online or whatever, and have the repository there. The second thing is the ideas themselves. The tools are no good unless we practice. And when you start using the tools and practicing and they become part of your, I don't know, without thinking of the unconscious competency that we've talked about, that's the level we want to be at. And the third thing is the transport. How are we getting it out there? That changed with technology over the last 3 years. I think that, that's just a transport issue. I don't even think we should be struggling with that. Again, more tools to get the tools out, to get the idea out, right? So I don't think we should be belaboring yes, the network, the hub and spoke is not where we want to be. And we talked about this with the drawdown group 5 years ago. I don't want people calling me every 5 minutes asking me how drawdown works. It's not where I want to be. It's not where we should be, right? We should be a mesh network. We could be nodes on a network, that's okay. But we don't want to be the center and be all end all. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't let you retire.
Well, and what we talked about for several years as we were figuring out what shape this organization would take, which eventually led to what will the board be. We talked about it as an ecosystem. That it was, it's where it came down to decisions would be made by those closest to the decision. in getting away from that hierarchical piece. And this feels, it's when I said before, it just felt like the other would go counter to our values. This feels like it is distributed. Like if we want ubiquitous and we continue to exist don't seem to go together. Ubiquitous seems very movement-like, where it needs to be owned by the people in the movement. It needs to be owned by Jackie and Madeline bringing this into their community, and Elaine and Nora bringing this into their community, and Mark, you bringing it to your community, and Carl, you bringing it to your community. That's ubiquitous. That is Creating the Future doesn't need to exist anymore. The resources need to be out there, but Creating the Future does not need to be the ones doing it. In our last 10 minutes together, as we take a moment to reflect, I'm going to ask us to reflect in a little bit different way today, because the question that I would like us all to answer is, in your mind, what is the gist of how we're moving forward? What are you seeing as from this conversation? What makes sense to you as to how we move forward? Of what are we aiming at? What are some questions that need to be addressed as we aim at that? But I would really like to sense that there is consensus about where are we heading?
So I think I started this discussion last time when you asked us this question. I think we are heading towards a passing on of the baton. And that is creating materials that are our legacy, your legacy. And you will, with the book and the other materials, you're going to continue to drive that legacy forward in terms of your own writing and your own consulting. But there's a legacy in terms of the conversations and the learning from us, the zigzagging, the documenting what the realities of trying to do this stuff are. But it feels to me like we're heading towards an end point. And the other thing that I think, if I may, that has sort of come out of the conversation for me, is that you've made me think a bit about politicians' careers. I know this might sound like a strange thing to say to you, but like most politicians' careers end in failure. And most politicians, they don't know when it's time to stop. They don't know when it's time to go, and they stay for too long. It's a bit like football managers. Football managers, they stay too. There's lots of examples of football managers that have stayed too long. And I think what I like about the way you're approaching this, it's like, you're planning, and because you know that like there is a risk that we can all stay sort of on too long. I'm not saying that's what you're thinking, but that's what it feels like, is that you know that the right time is to stop. And again, to hand the baton on. So it feels to me like we're planning towards an orderly handing on of the baton is the language I'm trying to.
Wow, thank you.
I think it's a interesting question of, does catalytic thinking naturally lend you to be an anti-organizationalist? In its sort of purest form, because I do, as we begin to think about these things, and I think a lot of the questions that a lot of us bring forward into this space is, again, how do we release the idea that we have to sustain a thing and really keep focus on what's out there? And I think, you know, having that time frame prevents you from slipping in that belief and that commitment, which is to say, you know, the idea was that 10 years something exists that is accomplishing the idea of people engaging in the world differently. And so I think, you know, if at the end of 10 years that hasn't been figured out, that doesn't speak to the organization, that speaks more to the fundamental understanding and of what really it takes to advance that. And so I think this really does force us to just, you know, what I'm hearing is perhaps a willingness to recognize that, yes, if we accept that the goal is not to have a crutch at the end of this 10 years that holds this thing up, just because it was the genesis of it. And I think that's the distinction. Something else may come along, but this idea that the generative thing, and particularly the foundational energy that Hildy, you and Dimitri, that cannot exist after 10 years is what I'm feeling.
Awesome, thank you. What else are you guys hearing? Where does it feel like we are headed? What questions still are arising for you?
I'll just add, I think I'm in line with what Carl and Justin have said. And I guess the key words that I've been thinking about is that word permission we talked about earlier, and then also commitment to, you know, the mission. And I think about that as in both of those contexts is being able to kind of create space, right, for others to come in and do the work. So that, you know, that means having the mechanisms or processes sort of, or direction, they're not directions, but some indications of where to head, but then letting people, you know, take it forward without, I guess the baton works too. But the baton's kind of solid object that people have to go a certain direction with. And I'm not sure if that's what we want to necessarily lay forward.
I love that image of creating space for others to do the work. That's huge. What else? What I would really like to hear from each of us. Of where does it feel like we are headed, and what is arising for you in that?
First of all, I want to thank Madeline for that wonderful little story about the Queen Elizabeth's party planner. And the words that come to my mind from that is leave them wanting more. And the best way to leave them wanting more is to not give them more. The more you give them, the less they're going to want more. So I'm thinking about it in that context, is moving on in a way that, and Carl, you talked about politicians, you know when it's time, you know, exit on a high note. I use all kinds of you know, colloquial phrases here for it, but that's what I'm thinking. And then all of the other conceptual stuff is what continues. So that's what comes to mind in terms of what's next, is in a more amorphous way as that.
Thank you. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, so we don't feel completely abandoned when you retire. I'm thinking that I've been working with Fritjof Capra for a while, and he's got an alumnus. He's got a group of people like us that are on a platform that are still in communication. And people have bubbled up. There are people he has trained, but also people have bubbled up to take leadership roles because they understand it better than a lot of other people, for example. But he's also available, as he's retired, he's also available for people to contact him directly. And I think that would be an added benefit to know that you were still, like if we got stuck somehow, that we weren't completely cut off. That's my fear. We're going to be completely cut off. There we go.
Mhm.
Feels a little bit like dropping your kids off at college or something. Well, I've never done that. So being dropped off at college by my parents, of like, you never really felt ready for it. It was pretty scary. And I had to trust that like I had the skills and foundation that I needed to take all of the lessons and things they had taught me. And now I had the freedom to apply them in whatever context and stuff like that made sense. And your part, Mark, around like, who am I going to call, or what you just said, my parents didn't go away. I could still call and say, Mom, the laundry machine like overflowed. What do I do? All my clothes are paid, you know, and it was okay. But there was that trust of that kind of natural next step. And it really feels like a freedom rather than an ending.
Yeah. It just as an aside, first of all, the fact that some of the relationships in this room go back a very, very, very long time. I think, Carl, you and me are probably the longest. It's got to be 20 years at this point. Dimitra can attest, I don't willingly let anybody out of my life ever. So that's pretty much the way that goes. Ron, where does it sound to you like we are headed, and what questions arise for you?
I guess my first question is, did you get what you needed from this conversation?
I will, once we've done with the go round, I will have absolute clarity on where we're headed, because it sounds like there is some clarity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little different. I didn't see this as confirmation that there's going to be a change in 10 years. I just saw it as a what if situation, and we were trying it on for size. But maybe it is true. Maybe there will be more discussion in the future about transition planning and leadership and things like that. More organizational stuff. Yeah, so, you know, I guess I just found it, I don't have any concrete takeaways other than I found it interesting exploring the alternatives, the two options.
Yeah, thank you. Jackie, Madeline?
I think the thing I'm thinking of is kind of the opposite of Mark's fear of what if we were totally cut off. And I think kind of if we were to accomplish our goal, it wouldn't matter if we were totally cut off from Hildy and Dimitri, because we would have so many other community members able to fill that, right? And so in Madeline's example of like, oh my God, the laundry machine isn't working. Okay, but if I have my whole dormitory there with me saying like, I know how to work the laundry machine, we got this, it doesn't matter if I can't call my parents, right? Because we've got this, right? And I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Thank you.
I still love you, not that I'd want you guys to go anywhere. Just qualifying that point.
Yeah, well, this is obviously coming from a point of conscious or even unconscious competence. I'm still at the consciously incompetent stage. So.
No, you're not. And Madeline, I do love the analogy of dropping your kids off at school. I'm, as you all have experienced, I am a consummate mom. I mom everyone. And my vision of being a mom includes ensuring, when Lizzie was little, I always used to say, I'm not raising an 8-year-old, I'm raising what will eventually be a 35-year-old. And again, context. I can't just answer the question here. I need to look at that big picture. Moms don't drop their kids off at the orphanage. Well, sometimes they do. Sometimes we want to. But to me, being a mom is raising kids that are competent enough that you can say, you know what, you're good. Right now, my daughter is looking for work. She has been looking for work for the past couple of months. All I keep telling her is, honey, so long as you are healthy and you are emotionally happy, I'm confident you'll find something. I know that she is going to do just fine. And to me, that's what the mom thing is. And no, you don't just drop them at the orphanage because you're done. You might threaten to, that's usually alongside the one day you'll have kids just like you, every mother's curse. But you make sure that everything is in place. And, several of you mentioned the word legacy. To me, if just walking away doesn't ensure a legacy. My greatest legacy is knowing that my kid is as competent as she possibly could be and that she is going to kick ass in the world. And my legacy with Creating the Future is knowing the exact same thing, that everyone who has studied with us and what we do over the next 4 years creates that condition where folks are able to get out into the world, just as you said, Jackie, that you're not going to need mom. It's real easy to think we need mom, as Madeline noted. I was dropped off at college and cried for 2 weeks. But I managed to survive. We all did. We all did. This feels right, given our values, given everything that we have worked on for the past several years, given our conversations about creating an ecosystem and a movement. This just feels right, everything that y'all are talking about. And it does definitely beg the question of all of these conditions that we said need to be in place. And that is exciting for me. What does it take to put these conditions in place? That's exciting to me. As an integrity body, knowing that all of the things that we just listed today need to be in place for us to have integrity to the mission, to the vision, to our values, putting those in place is exciting to me. Any other thoughts before we disband today?
Quick comment. I think this has been a really great meeting today. I've learned a lot. And also, Carl, the Cognitive Bias Codex, I could spend a lifetime studying that thing. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, I am feeling very, 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 very grateful to all of you. I am wishing that Vu and Farah and Eli had been here. The conversation would have been even richer, and I don't know that that's possible, but very grateful to all of you, and just thank you. See you next time.